In this kingdom, promises aren't made with words. They're made with daggers. The throne of Viridian wasn't won by swords, but by whispers. And now Queen Ilara maintains her power with a smile that hides a trail of murder. Everyone knows King Valerius is a broken man, a puppet in stronger hands, but no one dares to ask who truly pulls the strings. No one, except a servant girl, a ghost in the shadows, who dared to look where she shouldn't. Her name is Lyra. She saw the furtive glances between the Queen and the royal advisor, Lord Cale. She heard the muffled laughs late at night when he slipped into the Queen's chambers. It wasn't just an affair, it was an alliance, and in the highest halls of power, that means treason. Lyra felt a quiet pity for the king, a lonely and forgotten man. It was this empathy that made her break the most important rule of the court: do not get involved. She decided that the truth must come to light, not for a crown, but for a man living as a ghost in his own home. She didn't know that by choosing to expose the secrets, she was signing her own death warrant. Because in this world, the truth is the worst kind of treason. The deepest secrets are hidden in the shadows, but the whispers of truth always find a way. You are hearing this forbidden story from a place far from Viridian's court, but its treachery might feel familiar. Comment below from what city or country you are hearing this forbidden tale, and subscribe, because some shadows kill those who dare to expose them. Lyra's first step was to find tangible proof. She couldn't just tell the king a story, she needed evidence. The court was a labyrinth of gossip and lies, and her word as a mere servant would mean nothing against a queen and her most trusted advisor. She began to watch them, her presence as silent and unnoticeable as a shadow. She noticed their routine. Every third night, an hour after the final bell, Lord Cale would slip away from his chambers. He didn't use the main corridors, which were patrolled by the guard. Instead, he took a hidden servants' passage, its entrance masked behind a large, dusty tapestry depicting the Great Battle of Viridian. This route led directly to the Queen's private wing. Lyra, knowing the palace's secret passages from years of cleaning them, followed. She saw him vanish behind the tapestry, and a few minutes later she saw the soft glow of a lantern flicker in the Queen's chambers, a light that should have been extinguished for the night. This was not enough. It proved a secret meeting, but not a conspiracy. It was just another piece of the puzzle. The real prize was the note. Lyra had also noticed the small book of poetry that sat on a table in Lord Cale's study. It was a well-known book, a collection of love sonnets. But Lyra, while dusting, had seen Cale slide a thin, folded piece of parchment into its pages. He would later retrieve it, read it, and burn it in the hearth. It was a method of communication, a dead drop in plain sight. One afternoon, while Cale was in the council meeting and the Queen was with her ladies-in-waiting, Lyra took her chance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She slipped into the study, her hands trembling as she grabbed the book. She flipped through the pages. The note was not there. The book was empty. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. But then a thought struck her. She had seen Cale place a note in the book, not just read one. What if the book wasn't the drop-off point, but the communication device itself? She ran her fingers along the spine and the cover, feeling for a false bottom or a hidden compartment. Nothing. She was about to put it back, to admit failure, when she noticed a subtle discoloration on the inside of the cover. It was a faint, yellowish stain. She looked closer. It was an invisible ink, only visible under a certain light. Lyra had heard tales of such things from old servants who had worked for generations of nobles. She knew there was a specific oil, often used for treating fine woods, that could reveal the hidden message. Driven by a desperate impulse, she went to the castle workshops. Under the pretense of fetching a cleaner for a delicate wooden chest, she found the specific oil. She took a small vial of it back to the study. With a trembling hand, she dabbed a small amount of the oil onto the inside cover of the book. The faint stain darkened, and words began to appear in a looping, elegant script. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she read the first sentence. "The poison for the king has been secured." The second sentence sealed her fate. "The next target is Lord Aldrin, who suspects our alliance. We will make it look like he took his own life." The words were cold, pragmatic, and utterly damning. This wasn't just treason of the heart. This was murder. These were not notes between lovers, but a shared list of victims. Lord Aldrin, a kind and honourable man, was set to be the next victim. He was a close friend of the king, the very man Lyra was trying to save. Lord Aldrin's death would have been framed as a suicide, but Lyra now knew the truth. They were eliminating anyone who might grow suspicious. The list of secrets had just become a list of corpses. Lyra quickly memorized the note. She did not dare take it with her. She dabbed another cloth with the oil and wiped the page clean, hoping the traces of the message would fade. She put the book back, just as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching the study. It was Lord Cale. He entered the room, his eyes scanning it, a look of suspicion on his face. He looked at Lyra, his gaze sharp and piercing, but she was a perfect statue of a cleaning girl. He said nothing, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. He picked up the book and looked at the inside cover. Lyra's heart stopped. Had she left a mark? He ran his thumb over the pages, his eyes narrowed. Then he placed the book on the table, seemingly satisfied. He then spoke to her, his voice a cold and sharp command. "You are done here, go!" Lyra bowed her head and left, her legs feeling like jelly. She had a list of murders, a secret alliance, and a target on her back. Now she had to choose. Save herself, or save the king and Lord Aldrin. The second she had read those words, her life had been forfeited. Now she was not just a servant. She was a witness. And witnesses in Viridian don't live to tell their tales. The clock was ticking, and Lyra knew she had to act fast. She had memorized the note, and with every passing hour, Lord Aldrin's life hung by a thread. But confronting the king was a suicide mission. Valerius was not just a puppet, he was an invalid, isolated by his own sorrow and by the watchful eyes of Kyle and Ilara. A sudden appearance from a servant with accusations of murder and treason would be met with swift dismissal, followed by her own execution. She had to find a different way to get the message to him, a method that would bypass the Queen's network of spies and ensure the king would actually believe her. Lyra realized the king's one true confidant was not a man, but an object, his beloved hunting falcon, a magnificent bird named Arion. The king spent hours with Arion, training him, feeding him, and talking to him as if he were a trusted friend. The bird, a symbol of freedom and power, was a stark contrast to the king's trapped existence. Lyra had a wild, desperate idea. She would use the king's own obsession to deliver the truth. She needed to write a message, one that could be hidden, and a message that only the king would find. She knew that the king would be going on a hunt the next morning, a rare occasion that always involved Arion. That night, Lyra stole a piece of parchment and a quill. In her small, hidden room in the servants' quarters, she wrote a single, concise sentence. Lord Cale and Queen Ilara plan to poison Lord Aldrin. The key to their plot is in a book of poetry in Cale's study. She did not sign it. A signature would condemn her. She rolled the parchment into a tight, thin cylinder, no wider than a matchstick. The next morning, as she helped prepare the royal hunting party, she had to get close to the king's falcon without being noticed. The huntmaster, a gruff old man who kept a close eye on the prized bird, was her biggest obstacle. While the king was distracted, donning his hunting leathers, Lyra managed to slip a small piece of meat into Arion's cage. As the falcon devoured the morsel, she quickly and carefully slid the tiny parchment into the small, hollow space in one of Arion's leg bands, a space meant for carrying small messages from the battlefield. She was so close she could feel the bird's hot, angry breath on her hand. She did it just as the huntmaster turned to give the king a report. He saw nothing. She had done it. The hours of the hunt were a living torment for Lyra. She worked tirelessly, but her mind was with the king and the falcon. Had he found the message? Would he believe it? 1,000 scenarios of failure played out in her mind. What if the parchment slipped out? What if the king didn't find it in time? What if he found it but assumed it was a hoax? Finally, the hunting party returned. Lyra saw the king dismount, his face pale, his eyes distant. He did not look at anyone. He went directly to his chambers, carrying Arion on his gauntlet. He was a man with a 1,000-yard stare, a man who had seen a ghost. Lyra's heart soared. He had found it. He knew. But knowledge was not enough. Lyra had to see what he would do. She waited, watching the door to his chambers. A few minutes later the door opened, and a page boy emerged, carrying a message from the king. It was for Lord Aldrin. Lyra's blood ran cold. He had sent a warning. She didn't know what it said, but she knew it had to be a warning. The king's face was a mask of cold fury. He was no longer a ghost. He was a king betrayed. He had been a fool, but he was a fool who had just been given the weapon to fight back. The next day, the castle was in a state of high alert. A rumor spread through the court that the king was to hold a private meeting with Lord Aldrin. Lyra saw Lord Kael's face, his usual composed mask, now etched with a hint of confusion and concern. The plan was not going as they had expected. Kael and Ilara had planned to poison Aldrin at the evening's banquet. They had not anticipated the king's intervention. That evening, Lyra was serving wine in the great hall when she saw the Queen and Lord Kael exchange a nervous glance. They had to act. They had to get rid of Aldrin before he could expose them. Lord Aldrin was in the hall, speaking to a group of nobles, completely unaware that a poisoned goblet was waiting for him. Lyra knew what she had to do. The king was trying to save Aldrin, but Lyra knew the Queen and Kael would not risk discovery. They would find a way to silence him. She had to act. She had to save Aldrin, but more importantly, she had to expose them. She watched as a servant, a young, nervous boy, approached Lord Aldrin with a tray of wine goblets. This was it. This was their move. Lyra moved. She accidentally stumbled, bumping into the nervous page. The tray of wine goblets clattered to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the hall, and all eyes turned to her. The nervous boy was trembling. Lyra, feigning a clumsy servant, apologized profusely. The Queen's eyes were on her, a cold, piercing gaze that promised a swift punishment. But Lyra had done it. She had bought Lord Aldrin time. The poison had been neutralized. Lord Kael's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The game was no longer a secret. It was now an open war. The Queen, furious, had Lyra dragged away by guards. She was no longer a shadow. She was a witness who had just revealed the conspiracy to a hall full of nobles. She had saved Lord Aldrin's life, but she had sealed her own fate. Her plan had worked, but the cost was her freedom and likely her life. The guards dragged her away, and she saw the king, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and gratitude. The king had his weapon, and he was about to use it, but Lyra, the brave little servant, was now at their mercy. Lyra was thrown into the castle dungeons, a place of damp stone, iron bars, and the silent screams of forgotten prisoners. Her hands were chained, her clothes filthy. She was alone, but she was not broken. She had gambled her life, and she had won. Lord Aldrin was alive, the poison was spilled, and the Queen and Kael were exposed. Lyra had provided the king with the final, undeniable proof he needed. The king, however, was not a strong man. He was a man of words and books, not of daggers and plots. Lyra worried. Would he have the courage to act? Would he let his weakness allow them to escape justice? Her own fate was now entirely in his hands, and she knew the Queen would not hesitate to kill her as soon as she got the chance. Meanwhile, in the king's private study, an event was unfolding that would change the course of the kingdom forever. King Valerius, no longer a ghost but a man reborn in rage, sat opposite Lord Aldrin, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He had the parchment in his hand, a small, unassuming piece of paper. He had found it inside Arian's leg band. He had recognized the tiny, precise handwriting. It was Lyra's. Aldrin, still shaken from his near-death experience, sat in stunned silence as the king laid out the entire conspiracy. The affair, the murders, the plot to poison him. Aldrin, a man of logic and battle, found himself staring at a truth more horrifying than any monster he had faced on the battlefield. The king's sorrow was not just grief, it was a cage. His trusted advisor and his wife had been systematically isolating and murdering anyone who grew too close. "They have her, Valerius," Aldrin said, his voice a low growl of anger. "The servant girl. They will kill her to silence her. They will claim she was a spy, a witch. You must act now." The king looked at him, his face pale but his resolve now solid as steel. "They will try," the king said, "but she will be their undoing. They have shown their hand. We have the proof, and now we will have the justice. But we must be faster, and we must be smarter." The king and Lord Aldrin devised a plan. They would not confront Chael and Ilara. That would simply give them a chance to deny everything, to claim the king was mad. Instead, they would use the court's greatest weakness against them, its love for spectacle and its insatiable hunger for gossip. That evening, King Valerius ordered a royal decree to be announced. A private council would be held in the throne room, and every noble, every advisor, and every head of a great house was commanded to attend. It was an unprecedented move, and the court buzzed with speculation. Chael and Ilara were caught completely off guard. They had expected a quiet execution, a discreet end to the servant girl, and a calming of the king's anxieties. They did not expect a public forum. As they entered the throne room, they carried themselves with their usual grace and confidence. They did not know that the king had already placed guards he could trust at every door, men loyal to Lord Aldrin. The trap was set. The king sat on the throne, his posture straighter than it had been in years. The court watched, silent and tense. Valerius spoke, his voice clear and ringing with a newfound authority. "A great sickness has been eating away at the heart of this kingdom," he began. "A rot of lies and betrayal that has corrupted my court. A conspiracy of the highest treason aimed at my throne and my life. But tonight that rot will be cut out once and for all." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The king then called for Lyra to be brought forth. Ilara's eyes went wide. She had ordered the girl killed. How could she still be alive? Lyra was brought in, her clothes dirty, her hands still chained. She was a simple girl, but in that moment, she was the most powerful person in the room. The king looked at her and said, "Do not fear, brave Lyra. You are a witness, not a spy but a hero. You risked your life for this kingdom, and for that you will be rewarded." He then turned to Chael and Ilara. "You thought her insignificant. You thought her a shadow. You were wrong. This shadow saw everything. This shadow has a secret." The king then read the names of the men murdered in their plot. The court gasped. He told them about the hidden message in the poetry book, the invisible ink, and the plan to kill Lord Aldrin. Chael and Ilara's faces were masks of pure, unadulterated shock. They had not been betrayed by a spy. They had been exposed by a servant. They denied everything, calling the king mad, calling Lyra a liar. But the king had one final piece of proof. He called for the book of poetry to be brought from Chael's study. He then ordered a servant to bring the cleaning oil from the workshop. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the king, in front of everyone, dabbed the oil on the inside of the book's cover. The words, still faintly there, reappeared. The king read them aloud. "The poison for the king has been secured. The next target is Lord Aldrin." The silence that followed was deafening. The queen and Lord Chael were caught. The web of lust and lies, of secret affairs and murders, had been exposed. The king, broken no more, gave the final order. "Guards," he said, his voice cold and final. "Take them, for treason, murder, and the attempted regicide of your king. Let justice be done." The Queen and Lord Cale were dragged from the throne room, their masks of power and composure finally shattered. Ilara, screaming a final desperate curse at the king, was taken away. Cale, his face a grim mask of defeat, did not speak a word. He knew the end had come. The silence that fell over the court was absolute. The nobles, who had spent their lives whispering behind hands and trading secrets, were now faced with a raw, brutal truth. Their king, whom they had dismissed as a sad and broken man, had exposed a conspiracy that had poisoned their lives for years. The king, however, was not finished. He turned to the guards and ordered Lyra's chains to be removed. He then stepped down from his throne and knelt before her, an act that shocked the entire court. "You have been a truer servant to this kingdom than any noble," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You risked everything for my life, and for that of a good man. You gave me the courage to see the truth. For your courage, you are no longer a servant. You are a lady of the court." The king then offered his hand and helped Lyra to her feet. The court watched, speechless, as a new chapter of their history was written. The king had not just survived a conspiracy, he had reclaimed his throne and his dignity, and he had done it with the help of a young woman they had all overlooked. He proved that sometimes the greatest heroes are found in the most unexpected places. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. The royal dungeons, once silent, were now filled with the screams of Kyle and Ilara. They were questioned, and under immense pressure, they revealed the full extent of their plot. They had not only poisoned men, they had orchestrated accidents and orchestrated political failures to undermine the king's rule. They had a network of spies throughout the court, and now every single one was being hunted down. The kingdom was being cleansed. The king, with Aldrin's help, was running a new, decisive regime. He was no longer a shadow on the throne. He was a king in his own right, and he was reclaiming his kingdom, one traitor at a time. The whispers in the court were now not of gossip and betrayal, but of the new king's strength and of the brave servant girl who saved the kingdom. Lyra's life was turned upside down. She was given a suite of rooms in the royal wing, a personal maid, and fine clothes. Nobles who had once treated her as invisible now bowed to her. She was a celebrity, the person everyone wanted to talk to, but she felt like an imposter. The terror of the past few days still clung to her like a cold shroud. She was a simple girl. She had no desire for power or fame. She just wanted to live a quiet life. The king, however, saw her as a trusted advisor, a clear voice of reason in a court of whispers and lies. He gave her a position on his personal council, a position of great power and influence. It was her loyalty, he said, not her noble birth, that mattered. One afternoon, the king called for her. He was in his study, sitting by the fire. He was no longer pale and broken. He was a king who was finally at peace. He looked at Lyra and smiled. "They have confessed," he said simply. "They have admitted to everything. I have ordered their execution. Justice will be served, and it is all because of you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I did what I had to do, Your Majesty," she said. The king shook his head. "You did more than that, Lyra. You gave me my life back." He then looked at her with a new expression, a look of profound gratitude. "I owe you everything. You risked your life for me, and for that I will not forget. You have your freedom, your title, but I want you to know you are more than that. You are family." He then made her a promise. "The old kingdom of lies is dead. The new kingdom will be one of truth and honor. The most powerful people in this kingdom will not be those with the most wealth, but those with the most integrity." He then made her a promise. He promised to give her anything she wanted. A title, a house, anything. Lyra, however, did not want anything. She just wanted peace. The king, a wise man, understood. He had his own victory. He had reclaimed his throne, But he was a lonely man. Lyra was no longer a servant. She was a friend. He then gave her a final task. "There is one final task," he said. "I need you to tell the world what happened here. I need you to tell them how a simple servant became a hero, how lies were exposed, and how the truth always prevails. I need you to tell the world that a king can be a good man, and that a good man can become a king." The execution was swift. Queen Ilara and Lord Cale were publicly tried and convicted. The charges were read for the whole kingdom to hear: treason, conspiracy, and murder. The proof was irrefutable. Lyra's testimony, supported by the king's own account and Lord Aldrin's near-death experience, was all they needed. They were marched to the executioner's block in the center of the city, their faces stripped of all power and arrogance. They were met not with pity, but with a cold, unforgiving silence from the crowd. The people of Viridian had a new sense of justice, a new understanding of their king. The era of whispers and shadows was over. When the axe fell, it was not just the end of two traitors, but the beginning of a new chapter for the entire kingdom. The king had been avenged, his throne was secured, and the rule of law was restored. With the public spectacle over, the king and Lyra began the quiet work of rebuilding. The court, once a nest of vipers, was slowly being purged. Trusted, loyal men and women were put in positions of power, replacing the traitors. The king, once an isolated figure, was now surrounded by advisors he could trust. He was a king who no longer had to look over his shoulder. He was a king who was finally at peace. Lyra was at his side, not as a servant but as his closest confidant. She was a voice of reason in a world of politics and power. She reminded him of what was good and true. She was a constant reminder that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change the course of an entire kingdom. She had no desire for power or fame, but she had a desire for justice. She saw the good in the king, and she helped him become the king he was always meant to be. But Lyra still felt like a stranger in her own life. She had saved a kingdom, but she felt like she had lost a part of herself. The quiet life she had once known, the simple life of a servant, was gone forever. She was a lady of the court, but she was a lady without a past. She was a hero, but she was a hero with a secret. She knew the cost of power, and she had no desire to be a part of it. She wanted to go back to her small room, to her simple life, but she knew she could not. She was a part of the king's new kingdom, and she had to learn how to live in it. The king, in his wisdom, saw her sadness. He knew that she was not a woman who desired power, but a woman who desired peace. He knew that she had risked everything for him, and he wanted to give her what she truly wanted. One evening, he came to her chambers. He was no longer a king in a position of power, but a man who was grateful for a woman who had saved his life. "You have your title, Lyra," he said. "You have your place. But I know you do not want this. I know you want your freedom." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I am forever in your debt, your majesty," she said. The king shook his head. "No," he said, "the debt is mine. I owe you my life. And a king can pay a debt with more than just a title. He can pay it with freedom." He then gave her a final gift, a small, unassuming ring. It was a ring with a simple inscription: "For a brave shadow." It was a token of his gratitude, a symbol of her courage, a sign that she was no longer a shadow in his court, but a hero. He then gave her a final and most profound instruction. "Go, Lyra," he said. "Go and live your life. Go and be free. Tell the world what happened here. Tell them how a simple servant became a hero, how lies were exposed, and how the truth always prevails. Tell them that a king can be a good man, and that a good man can become a king." Lyra bowed her head, her heart filled with gratitude. She had a new life, and she had her freedom. She was no longer a shadow, and she was finally at peace. She was no longer a part of the old kingdom of whispers and lies, but a part of a new kingdom of truth and honor. The whispers in the court were now of her, the brave servant girl who saved the kingdom. And as she walked away from the king's castle, she was not just a lady of the court, but a free woman, a hero who had found her peace, a shadow who had found her light. The dust of a palace coup settled, revealing not a void, but a foundation of cold, hard truth. Lyra had returned to her small, quiet room, a place that now felt both strangely familiar and entirely alien. She was no longer a servant, but she was not a noble either. She was a woman in between worlds, carrying the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders, not because of a crown, but because of a secret. The king had given her freedom, but she knew that a secret of this magnitude was a chain she would carry forever. Her life was a before and an after. Before, she was a shadow. After, she was a legend. But legends are often lonely. Lyra knew she could not stay in the castle. The whispers that had once been of gossip and betrayal had now turned to her. She was a hero, a savior, but she was a reminder of a dark chapter in the kingdom's history, a chapter they wanted to forget. She was a living monument to the treachery of their queen, and the nobles, even those who were loyal, found it hard to look at her without seeing the bloody end of their old court. She had done her duty, and now it was time to leave. One morning before the sun had risen, Lyra packed a small bag. She didn't take the fine clothes or the jewels. She took only what she needed, a small map of the kingdom, a pouch of coins the king had given her, and the small, unassuming ring with the inscription, "For a brave shadow." It was the only thing she truly valued. She slipped out of the castle through the same hidden passage Lord Cale had used to visit the Queen, the same passage that had started this entire tale. She was a shadow once more, but this time it was by choice. She walked into the pre-dawn mist, leaving behind the palace of lust, lies, and murder. She was not running away. She was running towards her own future. She was a survivor, not a victim. Lyra traveled for weeks through small towns and vast forests, her identity a secret she guarded fiercely. She told no one who she was, where she came from. She was just a traveler, a woman with a story to tell. But she found that her story was already being told. The whispers of the new king's strength and the bravery of a simple servant had spread across the kingdom like wildfire. The people told stories of a king who, in his darkest hour, had found his strength and his purpose, and a servant girl who had changed the course of history. Lyra listened to these stories from a distance, a quiet smile on her face. She had no desire for recognition. She had her peace. She had her freedom. She finally settled in a small, quiet village near the sea. She built a small cottage, a place where she could finally be at peace. She spent her days gardening and fishing, and her nights watching the stars. She was no longer a shadow, but a light in her own small corner of the world. She was a hero, not because she had a title or power, but because she had the courage to tell the truth. Her story was a secret she would carry forever, a burden she had chosen. But it was also a testament to her courage, a sign that she had found her purpose. Her life was a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who are not looking for power, but for justice. The shadows of the throne had been exposed, but the greatest truth was not in the lies that had been uncovered, but in the heart of a simple girl who had refused to be a pawn in a game of power and deceit. She had chosen to fight, not with a sword, but with the truth. She had won, and her victory was a legacy of honor, courage, and a love for justice that had changed the course of an entire kingdom. Her tale, once a whisper in the dark, was now a legend told across the kingdom, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the purest heart can shine with a light that can never be extinguished. The whispers of the court are often forgotten, but the truths they hide can change the world. What is the one truth you believe is worth fighting for? Let me know in the comments below, and if you believe that the most powerful stories belong to those who refuse to be silenced, be sure to subscribe to the channel.